So today we're going to be talking about the controversy with regards to Utah Lake and the eutrophication that happens there each summer. And the Utah Division of Water Quality held a symposium where they got scientists together to talk through the issues. And this is one of the presentations that came out of that. I've modified it a little bit, shortened it a little bit, and we'll be doing my own commentary to describe this work that was done by Professor Merritt at BYU. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Utah Lake, it's a lake about 30 miles south of Salt Lake City, and it's a slightly saline lake, but mostly considered freshwater. It's shallow. The average depth of the lake is about 9 feet. It's turbid, which means that it has suspended solids in it, minerals that get stirred up at the bottom from the wind, causing the waves to pull material up from the bottom. And the visibility of the lake is pretty poor when that happens. It's also a eutrophic lake during the summer and has all of the issues associated with that, including algae blooms and dead fish. And it's a lake that is in a semi-arid region, which is Utah. So just as a reminder, eutrophication is really defined as an overproductivity of a lake due to plant growth, and it can significantly impact water quality through a variety of cases. And it's a natural process. It typically takes hundreds or thousands of years for a lake to move through the different phases to eutrophication. But it can be exacerbated or accelerated by human activities through cultural eutrophication. And just as a reminder, lakes typically go through the oligotrophic, the mesotrophic, the eutrophic phases. The new one that we're introducing here is the hypereutrophic. And you'll notice also over on the right, it goes from clear to slightly turbid to very turbid. And that is looking at the visibility of the water and the ability for sunlight to penetrate through the water. And you also have on the left the productivity of the water. So a low productivity to moderate to high to extremely high. So just for reference, here's a picture of an oligotrophic lake. It's located in the mountains. It's not very productive. It's clean, clear water. Here we have a mesotrophic lake, which is a healthy ecosystem that has lots of plant growth. It's got lots of fish. It's got ample nutrients, but not too many. It's got visibility there where the sunlight penetrates deep into the water. And then you have eutrophic lakes, which are over-fertilized and have algae growths that are covering the surface. You have excessive plant growth, you have lack of visibility, sunlight can't penetrate down into the water, a lot of decomposition going at the bottom, and you'll have layers of anoxic layers at the bottom, dead zones at the bottom with no oxygen. And then here we have an example of a hypereutrophic lake, which has essentially gone overboard in terms of the productivity, and the entire lake is essentially anoxic. And through this natural progression, most of the lakes will sediment up over time and will turn into marshes or wetlands. So here are some of the problems that can be frequent in eutrophic lakes. First of all, you have a reduction in the visibility due to the plant growth. You can have significant floating algae and other biodebris on the surface, and that can build up along the shoreline. You obviously have the decomposition of this debris, which causes which causes a loss of oxygen and sometimes dead zones in the water itself. This decomposition can lead to bad odors and lots of insects and aquatic bugs which are feeding on that. However, most of these problems associated with eutrophic lakes are really aesthetic, and they don't necessarily affect the water quality from a human consumption perspective, but they do have a lack of oxygen, which affects the animals in the lake itself. And of course, we all like pristine, clear waters. but even with no changes by humans, most waters have some kind of aesthetic problem and will usually go through the eutrophic conditions at some point in their lifespan. So let's take a look at the main factors that control the plant growth. One of the first is the light, the availability of photosynthetic radiation, and that is controlled in part by the location of the lake in terms of elevation and in terms of latitude, but it's also controlled by the turbidity or the visibility of the lake itself. We also have the nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, iron, sometimes that could be limiting nutrients that might control the plant growth as well. We have potential toxics that can be in the water system that can impact the plant productivity. The temperature of the water has a big impact on the growth rates of plants and algae. The warmer temperatures lead to higher growth rates. The time that the visibility or the nutrients or the temperatures have all been in a certain state. You have obviously the variability in those factors. Do we have a constant situation with lots of phosphorus, or does it vary over time? We have competition for nutrients within the water itself, and then we have grazing and harvesting by fish at the bottom. That can impact things as well. So here's a satellite image of Utah Lake, and you look at it and it looks rather weird. It's an odd color. It's kind of this milky brown color, kind of like diluted chocolate milk. And you often see these types of colors associated with glacial lakes, but there aren't any glaciers left in Utah, so you have to figure out what's going on. And what's going on is that because the lake is so shallow, the wind will constantly be mixing up the water, and there are bottom feeders in here which are constantly mixing up the bottom. And so you have a continual reentrainment of sediment from the bottom into the lake, except under conditions that are low wind speeds and not much biological activity. Just to give you an idea what it looks like from the surface, so take a look at the two pictures on the right. Those are the ones that really show the condition of the turbidity during the summer. The visibility is not much more than a foot in the water, and that has an impact on the photosynthetically available radiation for plant growth. So the Utah Division of Water Quality has a hypothesis. Their hypothesis is that Utah Lake is not naturally eutrophic, that it's cultural eutrophication that's responsible for the poor water quality in summer. They also have a hypothesis that Utah Lake is phosphorus limited, and that the source of that phosphorus is wastewater treatment plants. So sewage treatment plants remove a lot of the materials from it, but they don't remove all of the phosphorus. And furthermore, their hypothesis is that Utah Lake can be cleaned up by spending millions of dollars to improve the wastewater treatment plant operations. So here are the Utah County wastewater treatment plants that are in question. There are more than 10 of these. It looks like closer to 15 of these wastewater treatment plants. They all discharge into either rivers or creeks that eventually end up in Utah Lake. So if a wastewater treatment plant is putting out water that has a lot of phosphorus in it, that phosphorus is going to end up in Utah Lake. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to kind of map out how you would create a scientific study that would be able to look at the inflows for nutrients to Utah Lake and look at the outflows of Utah Lake and try and figure out a sampling schedule and how you would go about taking these measurements in order to be able to answer this question and test the hypothesis about cultural eutrophication. And of course, it would be nice to also try and figure out if how you would try and determine whether or not Utah Lake has always been a eutrophic lake, or whether or not that is something that's happened in more recent years. what kind of data might you look at to try and understand the history of Utah Lake, since we don't have direct measurements over a long period of time? So I posed these questions to a separate class, and we had a conversation about that. I can't have a direct conversation with you, so I will relay the results of that conversation with those students verbally, at least, in the next section.